So welcome to Dark Side of Therapy. And you notice it's different tonight because everything has changed because I'm not just a host anymore. I have a co-host whose name is Justin Coates. And we're going to give you something we've never given you before, which is actual dark material. Because Justin, it is time. It is overdue. We need to do something dark. And thank you for being my co-host on this totally new adventure.
Thank you for having me, Eric. I'm ready to jump in, and I love when you say dark. Let's see how dark we can get, right?
Here's the thing. I just want to say this, right? I have loved doing the Dark Side podcast. I've loved the guests. I've loved the material, but I started to realize this is not my original vision, right? It's not dark enough. It needs to get back to the form that I originally envisioned. So you're going to help me do that, right?
I'm going to do my damnedest, and
Ooh,
if not, we'll see what happens.
wow. Should I tell the story of how I met you, or at least how I came to know about you?
Yeah, do it. I mean, I'll be honest
Right.
with you. Before you even get to your part of the story,
Yeah.
I wasn't even sure. Like when I got the message from you, I was like, man, I don't even know. This is weird. I don't know about this guy. So yeah, tell the story. I like it, and who knows? Maybe it's that simple little message is going to turn into this huge thing. That'd be really cool.
So we're down at the Minneapolis conference, and I see this guy's got in the pamphlet. He's going to talk about TF-CBT. Well, this will be interesting. And I get there, and it's like this guy is actually giving points of view that say maybe TF-CBT, trauma informed, or I should say, trauma focused cognitive behavioral therapy, may not be all it's cracked up to be. And you had research behind it. And dude, I'm sitting there thinking this is really gutsy of you because I had never heard anybody sort of rally against TFCBT in the way you did. And it's not like you said this is the most god awful thing in the world, but you did challenge it and you cited the research. And I think you got people thinking. I think you pissed some people off too, because they really shoved this at you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I remember I remember shortly after grad school, applying for a therapy job, and they were like, "So what do you know about TFCBT?" And I was like, "I don't like it. I think it's sort of garbage, and I think that the research and the studies behind it are, trash." And I probably said it a little bit nicer like that, right? I was in an interview, but they were
Uh,
like, "Oh, yeah, tell me more." So I told them a little bit more about my theoretical perspective and why I thought TFCBT wasn't great. And then they said, "Hmm, well, we require all of our therapists to be TFCBT trained. How would you feel about that?" And I was like, I finished the interview. I was nice, but right away at the end, I was like, "Man, I'm not working there."
so they require this. They said if you're going to work for us, you're going to be trained in this.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, they were like, and I think they said like, "Oh, we get grants for this," and so it's sort of a requirement that we have this, but you can pull from whatever you want. We just want our therapists to be TSCVT. I'm like, yeah, no.
This happened to a friend of mine who went to a bigger organization. They didn't say exactly that same thing, but they basically said, you're going to be a trauma informed therapist. Like, what the hell does that even mean? Well, it means you're going to do it the way we say you should do it. And we both have strong opinions about that. There's a dark side issue right there. You're going to do it our way, as if these trauma based interventions are the only interventions that have ever existed or the only effective ones, because that's what I kind of take away. I don't know about you, but that's what I take away.
Yeah, well, and I think just what is the difference between being trauma trained and being trauma informed, right? And is there a difference? I mean, I'm informed on a lot of things. It doesn't mean that I'm
Right.
trained in them.
That's a really good point. I'm informed of how well I should eat. Doesn't mean I don't eat junk food, but I certainly know that
See?
I shouldn't.
Yeah, I just scarfed down a Taco John's burrito and a large Dr. Pepper before I got down here. I know I'm informed about what
Oh,
that does to me, but didn't stop
that
me.
sounds good tonight. You know what I just realized? DoorDash is a good thing because they'll deliver from virtually anywhere. I mean,
Uh, I don't know, man. You clearly don't live in rural Minnesota. I mean, not
no.
DoorDash, not so much.
Okay, so yeah, we got to talk about where I'm out in Minot, North Dakota. I'm literally the distance of the moon from you down to the Minneapolis area, but you're not even in Minneapolis, right?
No, I'm
No.
an hour south of Minneapolis. So the closest city to me
Okay.
is about 15 minutes south, which is Mankato. 55-ish thousand people. In my town of St. Peter is uh, 12,000. It's grown 1,000 in the last 7 years that I've been here. So that's really cool. But yeah, we're still pretty rural.
Do you like that though? Because I kind of dig being out in the middle of nowhere some days. Do you ever get that experience?
It's got its pros and cons. I grew up in a really small town. Um, in Minnesota, a very rural farming community, and I couldn't wait to get out for lots of different reasons. But I lived in Mankato for a while I was doing my undergrad. I loved Mankato. It's a big enough city, not in comparison to where I was born in El Paso. I mean, that's what 800,000-900,000, and certainly
Yeah,
not
right.
Minneapolis, but it's big enough. And then when we moved to St. Peter, it has a small town feel, but like close enough to Mankato where I can go to a bigger city if I want. So there's pros and cons, man. But I think ultimately, like, if I could just win the lottery, I'd probably just go live on an island somewhere. I don't think you can get any more rural or isolated than that, right?
Right. You know what I was thinking too? Wouldn't that be the great place to hold a retreat though? I mean, I don't know how many people do island retreats for mental health, but if I was going to retire, I would totally do that. Somewhere in the
Yeah,
Caribbean. I mean, that would be great.
yeah. We could like maybe one of the sort of games or whatever that they play. We could do like a Survivor, right? Uh,
I think so.
who who makes it
Why,
off the island?
why is that not considered therapeutic, right? I think absolutely fending for your life could be a great means of reinforcing your survival, but that's a whole other show, probably.
Well, that's what we call sympathetic part of your nervous system living right there.
Wow. You know, I'm gonna have to have links of all the stuff you're saying so that people yeah, but again, that's also a whole other issue. I can see the conversation's gonna be high end, so thank you for that. We got to get into the dark stuff now because I'm going to say some stuff tonight people aren't going to want to hear. God knows you are because virtually everything you've told me is something somebody's not going to like. So, trauma focused cognitive behavioral therapy. I've done it, I've gone through it. It's been probably 13 years, but this hasn't gone away. You know, as far as an intervention, this is something that pervades and it just keeps getting bigger. I think more and more clinicians get trained. There's a lot that goes into it, but it seems to be like the preeminent child-based trauma intervention. Is that accurate?
Yeah. I was just listening to somebody from a PRTF or what does that stand for? A psychiatric residential treatment facility.
Mhm.
She's sort
Yeah.
of the, I don't know, director or I don't know, whatever. And that's what she was marketing. We do TFCBT here. We do TFCBT here. Um, and I'm part of this big meeting that has a bunch of community members, and I'm like, bite your tongue, Justin. It's not the time or the place. Not the time or the place. But yeah, it really is. That's what people start with.
Why is this the big one? I mean, you've done more research than I have on this. Why is this the one that won? Tell me.
Well, it's evidence based, Eric. And when people, I mean, in grad school, come on, how many times do we hear it in grad school? Evidence based practice, evidence based, blah blah blah. And if it's not evidence based, right, it's not valid. Or even insurance companies, right? Uh,
Mhm.
know, that's a whole thing in of itself. But insurance companies, they're not going to reimburse you to do therapy that works. They want to reimburse you for therapy that's evidence based, right? um, and so I think that's one of the biggest things is there's this research behind it. It's evidence based. and insurance companies, that's what they reimburse. So sure, let's run with it.
Okay, so let's just break this down. If you're a new therapist coming into the field, you don't know what evidence-based means necessarily. You might.
Sure.
I think evidence-based means that we've done a crap load of research, and based on that, the outcomes are good enough that we're saying this is good evidence that this intervention is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, essentially.
Well, okay, but we could also say there's probably evidence that it's not effective, but that doesn't get reported nearly as much, does it?
Yeah, I mean it's sort of tucked in there, right? It's sort of like when you agree to the Apple updates that happen all the time. You're not going to read the 45 pages. You're just going to be like, yeah, that sounds good. I like it. Yep, update my phone. So it's somewhere in the research, but that's not what they start with.
Yeah, I never read that stuff. I just installed like two air conditioners, and it's like you wonder what you missed by not reading stuff. They don't want to burn the house down, but it's there for a reason, I suppose.
Right.
I think most people read that stuff. I don't think most people care whether it's air conditioners or mental health. And the other thing too that you and I think agree on is that if you're a big mental health entity, you can do your own research, support it any way you want to, if you have enough funding to do it.
Yes.
And somebody once said to me, just because it's not evidence based doesn't mean it's not effective in terms of an intervention, because there could be a million people out there with great ideas doing great work, but it never gets out there because they can't fund it, and then they have to try to sell it to an insurance company to get reimbursed, right? So that to me is the real heartache of all this, and the dark part of it is that there are good therapists doing great work, but it doesn't get recognized or counted in this big bubble of evidence that we talk about.
Yeah. Yeah, and you said it exactly right. I mean, you know, you want to know where you want to find your answers, you follow the dollar. I mean, let's just be honest about that. I mean, wherever the
Yeah,
dollar
yeah.
is, that's where your answers are. And unfortunately, um, when a study or research sort of doesn't fit the narrative, we make it fit the narrative. We just got to throw a
Yeah.
couple Andrew Jacksons in there, right? Right, he's on the 100, I think. I don't know. I don't have
Yeah,
many of
yeah.
those, so not used to it.
I don't either. It's been a long time since I've seen that dead president. Uh, so you just said something that I'm loving. It. We follow the dollar because it's true. Uh, I had a very prominent therapist tell me that's why cognitive behavioral therapy wins out, because they have the most funding to fund these giant studies, and
Sure.
you get 100,000 out of a million. That looks pretty impressive. 100 out of 1,000, maybe not as much, but 100,000 out of a million, that's huge. But I don't think most people are informed of that, and they just see the big number. Like, but again, there's always the opposite side, because a lot of these interventions don't help everybody. We just
Right.
like to think that they do.
Right. Well, and let's be honest. I mean, we don't need to go down a sort of a political route at this juncture. We're just starting. We're just getting off going. But
It is
um,
night one.
yeah. But how many times have you heard, regardless of your political views, how many times have you heard over the last 3, 4, 5 years? Well, did you do your research? And for some people, doing your research is a quick Google search, and Wikipedia told me, right? And people take
Mm-hmm.
that at face value, or well, it was posted
Yep.
on Facebook, so it must be true. So I think that's not everybody, right? But that is just sort of an example of people take things at face value. That's what they said. It was shared by this person, so it must be true. And I don't think for most people. I think for myself, when I was in my undergrad, I said I'm never doing research. I hate statistics, which I still do, but I have
Yeah,
found
it's
that
horrible.
they do. I mean, I don't want to do the statistics. I just want to know the statistics. So hopefully, when I get to that part of my doctoral program, I can take out a loan and pay somebody to do the statistics. But the
Right.
statistics and that stuff have helped me with my presentations and with me learning things, learning more information, and being able to say some of these things about TFCBT, right? Because being able to understand the mumbo jumbo in the research helps you to go, oh, yeah, that doesn't make sense. I mean, I think in my session that you were talking about at the conference, you know,
Yeah.
The study I pulled up, it said, you know, there were like 300 and some participants in this study, right? But if you had been, you know, if you had ever used drugs, or if you, you know, ever had this, or you ever had that, or you ever had this, you were excluded from the study. You couldn't be a participant. And as I was listing those
Right.
off, the audience sort of, I'm looking at people and hearing people chuckle. And I looked at them and I said, yeah, how many clients does that eliminate for you? And people chuckled, because
Yeah.
that eliminates all of them. And that's
Right.
just not real world, you know? I mean, those are the people that struggle with the hard, complex, um, you know, big T and little t traumas, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Right. Right.
so, you know, you have these, so, but one can take that study and go, yeah, see, look, the study says 350 participants, it worked.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool, evidence based. But you have to be able to read in there and say, oh, but 75 of them were excluded because they had too much trauma, that it wouldn't fit the mold, right? Um,
That's really what happened in the study.
that was one of like 6 that you know,
Oh,
I only had an hour that day. And as you probably can tell already, our viewers will be able to tell, I'm long winded with my answers. But, you know, I
yeah,
only had an
sure.
hour that day. And
Mm.
so that was one study that I took. And I was like, come on, really? Like, this is a great example of what I'm talking about. I'm not trying to be sort of this pessimistic, like, oh, all this stuff is terrible, and, you know, no, but I also want real authenticity. So don't shove a modality in my face when when the research is fixed.
On, no one's ever said the word fixed on this show before. Thanks for saying it. That's going to piss some people off, but thank you for saying it. Now, is it fair to say you're a trauma expert, childhood trauma expert?
Ooh, you know, that E word. I'm working up to that. I don't like it, so I've got a
Okay.
lot of knowledge compared to most people at this point in their careers.
All right.
When it comes to trauma.
I, I'm going to qualify. I'm going to qualify you this way. I would come to you if I had a question about children's trauma work. So I'll just leave it at that.
Sure.
So, are you saying that TFCBT may in fact not be as effective as we've made it out to be? Are you willing to say that tonight?
I think it needs to be broken down, and
Okay.
I think that there's sort of this blanket uh, perspective or idea about TFCBT that, oh, trauma, bring them in, it works, right? And I don't think that's
Mhm.
the case. I mean, I have a, you know, I have a study. I keep looking off to the right, not because I'm crazy, but because I've got a dual screen here, and I've got this study
Clarify.
pulled up, and it's it's by John Hopkins. So, you know, like, wow, John
Ah,
Hopkins, they're
yeah.
so big. I love John Hopkins. Right, is what people might think if you know that world. So, you know, of course, I go to it, and um, I mean, the acronym that they use is practice, right? That's sort of how they break
Mhm.
down trauma focused CBT. So practice stands for, the P stands for psychoeducation, R stands for relaxation, A stands for affective modulation, C stands for cognitive coping, T stands for trauma narrative and emotional processing, I stands for in vivo desensitization, C conjoint session, E enhancing safety. So those are the things in the
Damn.
TFCBT, and it's a model that lasts anywhere from 8 to 25 sessions.
Uh-huh.
Okay,
Yeah.
25 sessions, Eric. When I work with kids, 25 sessions. That's like 5 months. I mean, there
Yeah.
are kids that I work with where they won't even tell me like their middle name until like month 7. So you're telling me that in this short amount of time, you're going to get them to do all these things, or that you're going to offer this. So I think that it really needs to be broken down. And I think that cognitive behavioral therapy is effective for people that can access their front part of their brain, right? The front part of the brain
Correct.
is the part
Correct.
that, as
Correct.
it's that logical reasoning. It's being able to, have the conversation you and I are having right now. Children, teenagers, even a lot of adults, they're not there because they're in survival mode. And when you're in survival mode, you can't access this part. So how the hell am I going to write a trauma narrative when I'm just thinking about whether or not the foster home is going to kick me out tonight?
So you just said what the EMDR people said at that training I went to, except they said there is no trauma narrative because when you're traumatized, things do not get committed to memory in a sequence, which if we're talking
Sure.
narrative implies sequence, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so here it goes. Let's get canceled tonight. If there is no narrative in trauma, doesn't that effectively mean TFCBT really has a big gaping hole that nobody seems to be talking about?
Well, yeah, then it's just real therapy. I mean, psychoeducation, relaxation, cognitive coping. Okay, those are things that I do, right? That's sort of polyvagal theory or somatosensory
Mm-hmm,
work,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yep, 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 yep,
Yeah,
yep.
you take out the trauma narrative part of it. The trauma narrative is a big part of it. Some people that are trained in TFCBT might argue with me on that one, but come on, it's the big thing that makes TFCBT what it is. And you're right. The narrative about trauma is how it made you feel and how it is still affecting you in terms of how it has control over your nervous system. So I can do a whole trauma narrative, from 5 till 17. I can talk about when I was 7 and dad beat the crap out of me, when I was 10 and mom was using every day. I can do that narrative. How does that change how I feel? It doesn't.
Mhm.
And one could argue you're making me relive my trauma by making me do a trauma narrative.
Yeah, that's something I don't think we talk about either, which is the whole idea of re-traumatization, which that's almost kind of gone away in the field. Am I the only one that thinks we don't talk about that anymore? It's like it's safe every time to go back into a kid's memories, even if they're not perfect. But I think there is something about this that's probably highly dangerous. But again, I don't think we look at that angle. It's look, these kids need to do it, they need to heal. It's all about getting kids healed quickly, right? So they don't become adults that have these issues. I get that. But there's always something that seemed dangerous about this to me because kids are so fragile and they're so impressionable. And you
Yeah,
know this because, yeah,
and they don't know what they're signing up for other than I have to be here
right.
because my foster parents or my social worker or whoever is telling me, right? And so just do the thing you're going to do and talk about whatever and oh, you want to yeah, my dad used to this or my mom used to, right? I mean, that's not helping.
Yeah,
It's not helping. And so, I really think there are some good parts to TFCBT. Let me just throw that out there. I think the
please.
psychoeducation, I'm a big believer in psychoed. The relaxation, the cognitive coping, um, you know, enhancing safety. Although that's the last letter in practice, should be the first thing you do. You have to have safety before you can move on to anything else. But I do think there's some good things in there. But
Right.
you don't do that in 25 sessions, 8 to 25 sessions. You don't
Mm.
like practicing how to regulate your nervous system, how to recognize other people's nervous systems, how to co-regulate, all those things. That takes months. That's a lot of hard work. Um, and you have to remember, yeah, it's 8 to 25 sessions, but you have to remember that probably like 5 to 10 of those sessions at minimum are writing that damn trauma narrative, and then reading that trauma narrative to somebody that you trust, right? So like, okay, let me just relive my trauma by doing the narrative, and now let me relive it again by having you join in because now I'm going to tell you. I don't know. I mean, if somebody listening can really educate me on something that I'm missing, I'm all ears. I'm willing to say, oh man, yeah, I was wrong. But
we need to say this, my friend, that you and I are two men who've been in the field for a while. I got a few more years on you, but it's just like I think my 27th year. How many years have you been in the field?
As a therapist, I've been working as a therapist for 3 years.
Okay. And you, in that 3 years, have learned a lot of stuff. Um, and because of the work you do, it's been high intensity. So you may not have been in the field as long as I have, but I would argue that you probably have a more current education than I have when it comes to at least that part of things. So that's kind of cool. But I've got you beat in the experience. Don't worry, I'm not going to use that against you, or I wouldn't have had you come on. Um, but you and I are two guys here who are open to people saying, yes, this is what you're missing. This is what you're not focusing on. If anybody stands toe to toe with me and says, okay, Nance, here's the thing you're not getting, please. I ask my supervisees to do it all the time, and you're the same way. I know. If somebody comes at you, yes, tell us what we're missing here. I don't think most people function like that. I certainly don't think in this field most people function like that. But I think you and I can, because we want to be stewards of good information. And holy crap, is there a lot of bad information that is now floating in mental health through social media? I mean, it's bad.
Yeah, it is bad, and it's one of the reasons why I was so excited to do this podcast with you, is to get good information out there and have these discussions, and for people to realize it's okay. It's okay to challenge TFCBT. It's okay to challenge EMDR. It's okay to challenge, so on and so forth. It's okay. It's okay as a person with limited to no education to walk into your psychiatrist's office and go, I don't want to be on 75 meds. Can we rethink that game plan? It's okay. Just because they have MD behind their name does not make them God, right?
Right.
And I think that that's a big thing that a lot of people just don't feel empowered. And so they just go, oh, somebody told me that this is the thing to do. So now I'm here. And we put our trust in these people. And so empowering people, but also sort of shame on our, on professionals that aren't willing to continue to learn, right? Who just sort of say, "Yep, this is what I'm trained in, and I believe it. I'll die on this hill,"
Yeah.
and I don't, that's does
Mhm.
nobody any good.
Well, I make you a promise tonight, and for all the listeners and people that tune in, you can challenge me anytime you want to, because then I have to think about why I'm doing what I'm doing. I have to pull together a cognitive package of reasoning and rationale, and I don't see a lot of shows that do that. So let's let this be the show where you can say to me, I think you missed a step. I'll be like, okay, let me rethink my position, and I think that's how the best learning occurs. We actually talked a few weeks ago too about the idea that most people don't know the strongest argument against their case. So in TFCBT, for example, let's look at this tonight, since you and I are taking some fairly different approaches with it than a lot of people would. What is the strongest argument, do you think, that TFCBT is effective and can be a good intervention? What would that be?
That's a good question. I don't know. I'm still searching for a huge positive thing about TFCBT. But I I think I think if you listen, I use CBT as part of my practice, right? I mean, it's not my main thing, but I'm constantly pulling things in that are considered cognitive behavioral therapy, right? And so trauma focused CBT, I think can be helpful for sort of single episode type things, right? I was in a car accident, or maybe I didn't have any child neglect. I lived a pretty decent life in terms of trauma. And maybe,
Right.
I unfortunately went through something as traumatic as, being sexually assaulted, right? I think maybe doing a trauma narrative through that, because I have had adults come into my office and I'm sure you have, that want to talk about the thing. I want to talk about the thing that happened. And damn it, that's the only thing that's going to make me feel better is if I talk about it. Okay, let's open that door.
Right.
Right. And so there are times where I use that. And so I think that there are some skills that trauma focused CBT sort of highlights that I think can be really helpful and beneficial. But let's remember, children learn by people modeling, not by people telling them. Children learn
Mm,
by watching, by exploring, by experiencing life, by feeling safe, and
right.
they do not learn, which this is why the whole school system doesn't really work that well. But children don't learn by just teaching at them and talking at them and saying this is what you got to do and just do this. And I think that's why TFCBT doesn't work for kiddos and people that have significant trauma histories.
Wow. You know what I'm struck by again is they don't have the frontal lobe ability yet to do the work. That's the one I probably can't get past. But I'll say this about it because I've had peers tell me, Justin, that if I didn't have TFCBT, there are some kids that are so difficult to engage. I don't know what else I can do. At least there's a structure to this. Okay, so I do see some efficacy there, that there is at least a structure to it. So if I'm going to defend it, I'll say that because some kids, I think, if they're going to do therapy, probably need some structure. You may disagree. And in fact, maybe you already have with the teaching model you just threw out there, but that's okay. We could attack that too. But I want to ask you this. In your opinion, what is the best trauma treatment then for a child? What do you put at your top of the list so that people can listen to that and say, okay, I have something else I can look at?
I mean, it's a few modalities, but I think sort of somebody who, it's not necessarily the modality, but also the clinician, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
that
Yeah.
is that is something we haven't really talked about much, but I think that, I mean, I can be, the worst clinician in the world, but trained thousands and thousands of hours in all types of modalities. That's not going to be helpful, right? So I do
Right.
think that
Right.
the clinician and their ability to work with clients and those kind of things is also a big factor. But I do think that, you look at modalities like IFS, which is Internal Family Systems by Dr. Richard Schwartz, or
Mm-hmm.
ARC,
Mm-hmm.
which is Attachments, Resiliency, Competency. I'd have to double check. Don't quote me on that one. But that's by Dr.
I
Margaret.
know where you're going. Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Margaret
Yeah.
Blaustein, right? And then one of my favorites, which is the polyvagal theory by Dr. Stephen Porges.
Mhm.
And then
Right.
Deb
Right.
Dana, who is
Right.
a licensed clinical social worker, she took the polyvagal theory and put it into like these books for clinicians, right? And so I think those are really, and the thing that all of those have that are overlapping is we're not talking about the trauma. Like, we don't have to
Mm-hmm.
talk about the trauma because you know what? You had trauma and there's nothing I can do about it. I can't take it away. But you know what I can do? I can help you in this space, in this moment, manage the things that are happening right now. And
Mm-hmm.
by doing that, it doesn't erase the trauma, but it helps the client to control, um, or at least how, I would say control, or at least have some more, um, I don't know how you want to say it, just some more control over how those emotions are making them feel, right? How so let me back up for a second, Eric.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Trauma is not the event that occurs. So somebody that is beat with a baseball bat at 7 years old, that being beat by a baseball bat is not the trauma.
Mm-hmm.
The trauma is how that event affected us. What did it do to my brain, to my nervous system, and how does
Right.
that affect me today? So,
Right.
because there are many people who can have traumatic events, such as a car accident or those kinds of things, and it's not traumatic at all, right? So we can't say that events are
Mm-hmm.
traumatic. We have to say that the event, how did the event make me feel? That's the trauma, how I'm feeling about it.
It's a great point because I think the word is integration, how that event gets integrated into your
Yes.
experience. And Yeah, that'll be an upcoming podcast. Resilience, because man, has that gone away from the discussion completely. We forget how resilient people are. Okay.
Yeah.
And again, I think that doesn't look as sexy as, well, this bad thing happened. This much, explain all the behavior. No, no, not at all. We forget people are different, and resilience is different across the species. So I get your point, and I get your point too about, we sort of want to cut off the head of the dragon, basically, to kill it all. We got to go to the source, right? That's what you're saying, that this is an approach that wants to just
Yes.
cut it off, and it doesn't work like that. I like that
Right.
you're saying that.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, I'm not a huge car guy. I would never fix my own car because, I'd have
Me either.
1,000 extra pieces. But, if you'll follow me for a moment with this car example, it's, if my oil is leaking and I keep running out of oil, I can keep going to opening it up and pouring oil in it every month, right? Every week. I can keep filling it with oil and filling it with oil and filling it with oil. All I'm doing is managing or attempting to manage the behavior, but it's still leaking. It's still leaking, and I'm paying money to constantly fill it up, right? So why would I continue to fill it with oil, Eric? Why not shut the damn car off and go, why is it leaking? What is the source of the leaking, right? And and once you get at the source, then you have no more leaking, right? And so I think about therapy and trauma in the same way, is like, when we do sort of TFCBT, or really, my comment about the schools and sort of like, the EBD, the emotionally behavior disturbed classes,
Yep, yep.
schools, their research on how to work with kids is, for the majority, at least here in Minnesota, if you go on the website, it all comes from behavioral psychology. You can chase the behavior all you want. You can fill the oil all you want, but unless you get at the root, there's a phrase from the trauma version of Love and Logic parenting curriculum, and it says, "We will not see academic fruit until we heal the emotional root." And I think that applies perfectly to trauma.
That's really good. That's really, really good. All right. So a new clinician comes in and says to us both, "Do I get trained in this stuff?" What do we tell them? Yes? No? What do we say
Hell
to them,
yeah, you
Justin?
do it. Yeah, you do it.
Okay.
Because you know why? Because when you go to apply at another agency and you say you're TFCBT trained, it looks good on your resume. Or if you are trying to start your own practice, being able to say, "Yeah, I'm TFCBT trained," that looks good on your resume, right? And then you keep going with your training, and you learn that TFCBT for the most part sucks, and then you go find real modalities and be like, "And I'm also TFCBT trained, but I'm also trained in all these other things. So let me tell you why TFCBT doesn't really work all that well for complex trauma," right? I think, you know, that was sort of real, what, crass maybe. But I think
No, it's
you
dark.
gotta,
It's dark.
that's, man, I'm telling you, we have to have the dark and then the darker side. um,
Apparently, it made, yeah. It's like, I was going to quote Spinal Tap. It's like, how much more black can this get? None.
but it's,
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in, you got to learn to play the game, right? And part of playing the game is learning what fancy trainings and certifications and things like that to have, um, because even though you don't believe in them, right? Sometimes you need to have them for people to listen to you, So what you do with that afterwards is what really counts and what really matters.
And I agree with what you're saying. I'm going to give an alternative reason of why people should get trained. It's so they can compare the different modalities and say, you know what, motivational interviewing, that I think that's got some more, or to kind of cherry pick stuff. Because again, I think every intervention probably has something in it that's of value. It's just, I don't see many people purely practicing with one model versus the other. I'm sure some do, but I don't. I can find great things in DBT, in Rogerian therapy. But to me, that's the real value, is you want to get trained in as many things as you can, just so you can have the information. I think there is value there. And yeah, some of it you're going to be like, well, this sucks. I don't see any practical application to this. Okay. Uh, Put away your Freudian book. Maybe that's not going to be helpful, but there's going to be other things. But ultimately,
Hey,
we
now
know the connection.
don't be hating on Freud. Freud is my man. Like I'm a Freud fan.
Look, I'll quote Greg Lester, my personality disorder guy. He said, Freud was a trailblazer. You got to give trailblazers a little bit of credit. I'll give him some. Okay. There it is. We probably wouldn't have modern psychology without him. But here's my big takeaway tonight, as you and I are talking about this. I think we've been dark, but I'm kind of getting the flavor. It hasn't been too dark. It's been honest. It's been our appraisal. But I do invite viewers to chime in. Tell us what we did miss. Give us your perspectives. Tell us your success stories, all that stuff, because we want to know. All right. Because like I said, I'm saying this, you're saying this. There's a therapist out there right now who's saying this is a bunch of crap. These guys don't have a clue. That's the way it is. And we're not going to get away from that. But what the difference is, I invite that discussion. I invite him to come on the show, Justin. Let's talk about it. Okay. I'm so tired of people being siloed in their perspectives that they won't even talk about what they believe. It needs to end, especially in mental health. I can't think of a field that depends more on other points of view and looking at those points of view. And that's my rant about that.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I think, one thing that one of my clinical supervisors told me was, towards the end, I told her, I said, I appreciate you working with me, being my clinical supervisor, and I know I'm not an easy clinical trainee, right? Or somebody that it's not easy to be my clinical supervisor. I know, and I hear myself sort of in my clinical supervision. I remember. It was more of like me defending everything that I thought I knew versus wanting to learn. And I thought that that's how it was coming across. So I owned that at the end. And she did say that. She said, yeah. She's like, many times I had the thought of like, here's this guy newer to therapy, the therapy world. And how is he going? He's not trained in EMDR. He's not trained in TF-CBT. He's not trained in ART. He's not trained in brain spot, but he's going to come out and have these heavy opinions. And we were able to have that discussion, right? And so I'm not saying that I'm 100% correct. Probably 99%. No, I'm not saying I'm 100% correct, right?
Pretty high,
but I am saying that I've been around. I may have only been a therapist for 3 years, but I've also was around in the child protection world. I was also around in the group home world, and I've seen these things. I've seen, behavior analysts trying to make these kids robots by doing these behavioral plans. Sorry, behavior analysts. And it just, so it's also life experience just with that. But like you said, yes, for those people out there that are listening who are like, bro, what, really? You had this guy as your co-host? I also invite that discussion because I want to be educated, right? I think everybody can agree that TF-CBT or EMDR or whatever does not work for everybody. I think we can all agree on that. And if you disagree with that, that would be an interesting discussion.
Then I would pull out the gloves, because that's like saying everything works for everybody, and it doesn't. So yeah, there I think we might have some the Dukes would go up. But I can agree that some things work for some people, they do, and some things don't work. And it's up to us to figure out how to help them find things that do work. And TF-CBT is not an end-all be-all. And clearly tonight there's some flaws. We've looked at those. People are still going to get trained. We want them to get trained, but there are some flaws there. And I'm sure as the episodes continue, we'll come back to this. I think it'd be really fun to debate DBT. I think that would be a great one, because this is another big one they really swear by. I was talking to a friend about this, Justin, and to get truly trained and certified in DBT, it's like $7,000, $8,000, maybe more. These are not expensive things to get credentialed in. And I start thinking, that's a lot of money to put into an intervention. And how many DBT based clients am I going to get? So the new people need to understand that too. This is a huge cost commitment, some of these interventions.
Yeah.
So that's something to think about when you go in the field. And not every agency is gonna pay that.
Right.
I want to end on this note and get your thoughts on this. I just have loved the thing tonight, and I don't feel any pressure. Like, I'm not an interviewer tonight. I have a co-host, and so I'm really loving the experience of that. But I want to say this: Irv Yalom, who I'm sure you know, in his book The Gift of Therapy, says
I
create a
love it.
different therapy for every client.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that?
Yeah. The experience cannot be the same for every client. If you're doing the same thing over and over, you probably should go work at McDonald's. I mean, it's therapy doesn't work that way. You might
No.
have some clients that, sessions are similar and things are overlapping, but if every client has the same therapy experience with you, I would encourage you to sort of take a step back and go, why is that happening? Why am I doing the same thing over and over? Because they are ultimately, the clients are the experts of their own lives. They know how they feel. They know what's going on. And so we come in with we should come in with a nice toolbox, right?
Palette. Palette.
Yeah, yeah, and be able to offer them various things, various resources. But we need to listen to them, and I think that clinicians that don't, that's why things seem the same all the time, right? Like, just do this, and since I'm not trying to completely knock on TF-CBT, but because that is the topic of tonight, when you look at TF-CBT, that's sort of what it feels like. It's sort of the same experience, right? When you get into these really regimented things, this is what we're going to do. That just doesn't really, it's not even just my opinion. It's what the research on trauma says. You cannot be that regimented, that strict, that you just can't. That's not how it works.
So I have an idea. In the next few months here, we need to debate Bessel and Gabor. We just need to do it because these are two of the biggest names in trauma right now. And I know you and I do have some differing opinions, so that's going to be fun to kind of unload some of that stuff. But it's going to be great. Uh, yeah, this has been great. I realized too, I got to get a different background now because I don't have a studio anymore. So I don't know. Are you going to get a background, or do we need to? Does the audience care? I don't know.
Well, I really, the only reason why I'm doing it in the basement of my house tonight was because things have been a little bit chaotic. I'd rather do it in my therapy office because behind me I have my nice polyvagal poster. So anybody who's anti-polyvagal, they can just stare at that for the entire session,
Right.
or the entire
Gotcha.
episode. I don't know. I mean, it'd be really cool, Eric. We'll have to meet up sometime. I think it'd be really cool to do an in-person.
It would be.
In-person episodes. Then I can
I
bang
think
on the table and push myself back. We'll save that episode. We'll save the in-person episode for the personality, for the borderline personality.
Yeah. That's gonna be, the blood may boil during that one, but that's fine too. In fact, that took my mind off the banner I got to get. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to do this with you tonight. We're thinking about doing this together twice a month. Who knows? Maybe it'll turn into more. But great discussion. And for you newbies out there, it's not going to get any more real than that. And Justin is an expert, in my opinion, on TF-CBT and early childhood trauma. So please listen to his insights. Please like and subscribe. We'd like to get some more people out there on board. And again, do not be afraid to be critical of us. That's what we want. No fear in that. So again, moving forward, Justin, great to have you as a co-host. It was awesome tonight.
Yeah, likewise, Eric. Thank you for having me. I look forward to many more discussions. I do want to sort of get you fuming a little bit, so we'll have to do something where we really have differing opinions. But but I also just sort of want to uh, just sort of repeat what you said, and
Mm.
as people listen to this and shoot us ideas, shoot us
Mhm.
comments.
Yeah.
You can tell me that you really hate my voice and everything about my opinions in a nice way, right? There's always about how you approach it, right? So send
Absolutely.
us those
Yeah.
things. We want to hear those things. Um,
Yes, we
I
do.
work with teens, so there's really nothing anybody could say that's really going to hurt my feelings too much. So I invite the discussion.
Yeah, me too. And I've worked with a lot of people with severe SPMI, so there's very little I haven't been called or heard at this point. So yeah, feel free. Uh, all right, thanks so much. And again, we will see you next time.